and welcome back to Slaying the Craft, the show where we go inside the mind of a thriller writer. I am your host, Sabrina Thatcher, your cheerleader with a knife, book coach, author, podcaster, but most importantly, fanatic of the genre. I'm very excited to introduce my guest to you today. Melanie Anagnos is a crime novelist who was born in Paterson, New Jersey, the backdrop of her police procedurals, and we will be talking about this. Melanie has been a waitress, an attorney, and a stay-at-home mom to her now 2 adult children. She received her MFA from Sarah Lawrence College, where she was awarded the Gurfine Writing Fellowship, and currently publishes a Substack, Cherchez la Femme, drawing on media and pop culture from the 1970s. Her debut novel, Night Swimming, was released on June 26th of 2025. Welcome, Melanie.
Oh, very nice to be here.
We're excited to have you. So before we get into anything, tell me about Night Swimming, about your debut novel.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. It was very exciting to finally have a novel out, and I really enjoyed writing crime fiction. It's a police procedural that takes place in the late 1970s, and I write a male protagonist, which was different and interesting.
Yeah, Jamie, right? Jamie
Jamie
Palmieri.
Palmieri, yes.
Yeah, and so Jamie is, what I thought was interesting too is Jamie's a patrol officer. He's not even a detective, but he's getting an opportunity to like stretch and grow for himself on his career to become to become a detective. So how did you do the research and develop this character?
I did a lot of research. I read crime fiction, but it wasn't my primary genre.
Mm.
And the character of Jamie had come to me when I was writing actually a different novel, a quiet novel. And one day I just decided to do something completely different. And people always say like, well, how did you come to write a police procedural? And I've never had a good answer. My answer is I don't remember. I only remember when I realized it was a really bad idea because I've never written one before. And I remember having that feeling of I've never done this, and I think I just really wanted that challenge of just because I think when you do that research, you're just pushing yourself into a different area, and so to that point, there are a lot of podcasts out there that do interview detectives. They're true crime, but they're really focused very much on the detectives and how
Mhm.
they unraveled the cases they were involved in. So I did a lot of that research. I did a lot of reading. Went back to the classic police procedurals, the Martin Becks from the 1960s and 70s, and
Mhm.
having such great resources really gave me a foundation.
That's fantastic. And so when you were thinking about Jamie as a character and him being a patrol officer, not quite into a detective, how did you develop that? Is that something that like it came to your mind of why would he not already be a detective and what his arc would be?
I think that, again, the character came to me first before I actually had decided to write the crime crime fiction, and I think it really worked well with his journey because he was thrown into a situation that he was, you know, ill prepared for in some ways, but in other ways prepared for. And when you think about so much, I think of my path, as a young attorney, and the stakes were high, but not that high. And you think of police officers, they go through field training and then they're out, and the stakes are enormously high. And whether they've had good training or bad training, they're out there and expected to perform. So I liked that tension of being new but rising to the occasion.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And such a great way to connect with the character. And is that something, or was there anything you were specifically hoping that people would connect to in Jamie's story?
I think, well, when I enjoy character driven fiction, and that's what I love to read, and as a writer that's what I enjoy. So just as a character, just finding Jamie, someone that you could relate to. I mean, I think again we could all relate to being in a situation that was challenging and where we had to really push forward. because people were relying on us. So, there's that. And just, going back to the 1970s and being a young man in the 1970s where the social, the social norms were changing. I also found that interesting.
Yeah. Um, so are you planning to have this be a series? Is this
That
kind
was
of the goal?
yeah, the intent is definitely to do at least 3 books in this series.
Okay. So, Kirkus Reviews calls out the setting of Patterson as a standout component of this book. Can you talk about setting the book there? Because I'm going to be honest with you, Melanie, all I know about Patterson is that from the Real Housewives of New Jersey, that Teresa Giudice grew up there.
Oh, okay. Well, I have not watched that, but
No,
perhaps I
don't. It's
should.
probably for the best that you don't.
Um, well, there, a couple of things. I mean, a couple of things really came together for me. One, it's what I'm familiar with. So they always say write what you know. So if I was
Hmm.
writing a piece in New York, and I live close to Manhattan. I don't live in Manhattan, but I certainly could have done the research. But I felt like I wasn't sure I could do really anything interesting in New York that hadn't been done already.
Hmm.
And when you place characters in a location, the location becomes very important. And what I liked about Patterson was that it was a city, so you had that grit, that little bit of a noir element, but it was also a small city, so people knew each other. There was also that element of community.
Hmm.
So in that so just from like using a city, that really worked for me. And I'm just going to shout out Patterson. I think it's a really interesting location. I mean, it was, I think a lot of people don't know the history. It was one of the first, it was, I think, the first industrial city. It was a planned city, has, beautiful architecture. And, it's been like, used in literature and other arts. It was the William Carlos William poem. There was just recently a movie, Patterson. So, it's sort of just, it's one of those, it's like this small under the radar cities that just pops up. So, and in that sense, I enjoyed, having it to work with.
Yeah. Do you have people that you know, like your friends or family or what have you, that they'll be like, "Oh, I recognize this place from from real life that's in the book." That kind
Friends
of thing.
have, I've gotten, emails on my website from people who, grew up in Patterson and really enjoyed the location. So that, that was, and I mean, it's hard because you're going back 40 years and,
Yeah.
you want to get the location, as accurate as you can without actually, like the landmarks aren't there anymore,
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
them.
So what was the most fun part about this story to write and what was the most challenging?
The most fun part was just putting together a crime because I really enjoy doing a crime that could actually happen in real life.
Hmm. Do you want to talk about that
And
crime a little
so,
bit of like
so
what it is that they're investigating?
right. So just like that puzzle of how what was the crime and how are they going to find out what happened because there's no CCTV cameras, there's no DNA. So just really, really structurally it was a puzzle that I had to figure out and then figure out how these clues would, be, available in a realistic way. So that was something I hadn't expected to like as much as I did. I think the hardest thing for me was writing one of the characters of some of the women because this took place in the 1970s where there wasn't a lot of agency for women. So
Hmm.
I needed to be true to their experience, but also create women that were relatable to today's reader. And
Right.
that was, again, something I hadn't expected to be as much of a challenge as it turned out to be.
And how'd you work through that? Like tactically, did you put up your characters and think about like, if this were modern day versus, in the 70s, like how were you able to build them out and being able to be true to both sides of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I sort of muddled along and
Hmm.
tried to be honest with what their opportunities were. And I always go back to one of my favorite books, which is Jane Eyre. And a lot of people say, well, like 'cause no spoiler. If you haven't read Jane Eyre, the final sentence is, "Reader, I married him." And a lot of people think that's, well, like, she wasn't, her own person. But what I think is so charming about Jane Eyre is she didn't have a lot of agency, but what little agency she had, she really took control of. And I think that's what I tried to do with my characters is, even though there was a limited amount of agency, I didn't create agency that wasn't there, but I gave them the opportunity to make the most of what they had, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that does make sense. And I feel like that sounds, I mean, that not only would be like a fun and interesting challenge to write, but also creates depth for the characters themselves. What do you hope that readers walk away from this book feeling?
I want readers to be entertained. I mean, I really feel that, if you're writing genre, you have to be true to genre.
Hmm.
And that was really important to me. There was definitely, social context. And, there are people who, have, done reviews and really, focused on that. But I've also had readers who just love the, quote unquote, the police stuff. And I just, I enjoy, hearing both, responses, because
Yeah.
it should be fun. I mean, fiction, storytelling is entertainment.
Yeah, it is. It truly is. And I think that that's also a fantastic answer because sometimes there are stories that there's a deeper thing or there's some sort of character that they want to be connected to. And there's also I am of the opinion that I want to be entertained. I want to entertain, and I think that there's nothing wrong with having a deeper message, but that if this is what you want to do, that is okay. Like that it doesn't there's no um I guess there's like some ideas out there, between literary and commercial and like what you're trying to say and things like this or what's the underlying message. And not every book has an underlying message. Sometimes it's just for fun and entertainment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what drew you to writing this genre? So you talked a little bit about it before, but and like what's keeping you here versus doing more literary? You have an MFA, for example. What's keeping you here in this space?
It just, I think what we've been talking about, just one, I enjoy the characters and I enjoy the location, so I want to stay with that part of the story. But I enjoyed writing fiction, crime fiction, and I felt like you could do a lot with it. Like you can have fun, you can be a storyteller, but you can layer in, different, themes without taking away from the storytelling. And I enjoy that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny today on Threads, I was scrolling through and somebody was saying something about different tropes and I can't remember exactly what they were saying, but they listed out all of these different tropes and how like tired they are or whatever. And then Ruth Ware commented and was like, a murder would solve all your problems in each of these situations to make everything more interesting. And I was like, you know what? That's true.
It's yeah, and you know what's interesting about it? There's a nonfiction writer. I think his name is Matt Murphy. I think he was a former prosecutor, but I was listening to him talk once, and he said something which was so interesting to me. Is that, like, there's basically four motives of murder, and they've been the
Mhm.
same for thousands of years. It's like, I
Yes,
think, greed, lust, jealousy, and
revenge.
and anger. And I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, but you could still make news stories, which is,
Yeah.
I think, so interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really interesting. And I mean, that's what they say all the time. Every story's been told. Well, in one sense or another, yes, right? But it's what makes us unique, and this is something that AI can't do is the human lens, right? Like, and how we all have a different perspective and a different experience, and that's what we bring to the story. Rather we're writing it or reading it, and that's how we can have those experiences.
Very much.
If you could teach a new writer one thing, what would it be? And can you teach it to me right now?
Well, one thing that was told to me is that, and I can't remember the exact quote because, of course, it's not on the top of my head, is that limits give you freedom. So if
Mm.
you decide, who your characters are. If you, and in genre, if you, this is the story, this is the murder. And then you can be very, very creative in a small space. So, I think the thing that I would say, the teachable part of that is narrow what you want to say and then be creative in those confines.
Yeah, I like that. Especially if you have a mind like mine where it's like, I have no shortage of ideas. That is not my problem. My problem is not that I don't have an idea, it's I have too many and it could go this way, it could go this way. So I love that thinking about how the limitations actually give you the freedom to focus and make it into something
Right.
incredible within this parameters. I really like that. Leading in, so one of the things we kind of like I asked like when folks sign up, what they would like to talk about, and you said you were interested in discussing crime fiction to explore social issues. You want to talk about that a little bit, and have you done that in night swimming?
I think, and we talked about Patterson as a place, like the place, really defines the characters. And when I say place, it's not just the location, it's the time, it's, the social norms, the pressures on the characters. And and I think you can't really write crime fiction without really thinking about those things. And one of the things that I wanted to explore in night swimming was how young men were adapting to, gender norms, and
Hmm.
in the late
And the
1970s. And
changing,
and
yeah.
one of the things that I that struck me, and this is a generalization, but you always see, the either you would have the male, like the misogynist who was like against, what was then called women's lib, or you'd have these very, sensitive men. And, I always thought, well, who are the guys in the middle? And I thought, well, isn't it interesting to have a young man in a very male centric, position, which is, a police precinct, and, dealing with women and issues affect, impacting women. And let's, like, how would he respond to that? So,
Yeah.
and again, it's woven in. It's not, if you read Night Swimming and you never see that issue, I would not be upset.
Yeah.
If you just saw it as, oh, this is a story that I really enjoyed, that's great. But I also feel like those layers do add texture.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that and choosing to write a story like this with that angle, but from a male's point of view. And is it that since Jamie's kind of on the younger side, so we're seeing him also dealing with his counterparts of his age, uh, the women, and like taking over women's lib happening, but then also dealing with this like very patriarchal, very old school kind of thinking. What made you decide to go with a male perspective during in that?
These are, things that sort of just, like come together sometimes. You're writing a male character, you're thinking about the crime, and you're thinking, well, how would he look at this crime? How would this crime be, have viewed, 20 years earlier? Who are the
Hmm.
people? What is society telling young men now that, wasn't being said 20 years ago? So, and, that was really the starting point. And just bringing the characters to life, and putting them in different situations where they're viewing people,
Hmm.
females, males, and what is what they're encountering in the culture.
Yeah. And so in that, let's talk a little bit about balancing plot and character development because you kind of have to have both, and the plot furthers the character, but the character is going to react to the plot based upon their who they are. So how do you kind of balance both of those to make it a very rich experience for the reader?
I think there's stakes can be different in a thriller, or in crime fiction, mystery. I mean, thriller, the stakes are really
Yeah.
high, something's there's a bomb, something's happening. But
Yeah.
stakes can be personal,
Hmm.
and that's also going to draw the reader in. And you would want to turn the page and see what would happen. So to me, when I'm talking, when I'm balancing character and the plot, I'm making the stakes personal, and that's actually what's driving the action.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So when you are like planning out, are you a planner? Like, do you plot and plan? Do you write straight through? Kind of what is your, the
So
big question. Are
far,
you a
for the
plotter or
for
pantser?
the for the for the for the book that I've published and the two that I'm are quote unquote in the works, I've always known the first chapter and the last chapter,
Hmm.
and then I'll write towards that and do a lot of editing, and then I'll I don't know if it's plotting, but as I have a draft and I'm seeing what's working and what's not, then I'll start doing more more structural adjustments.
Yeah, that makes sense because sometimes you have to kind of see the story before you can figure out, well, what is this story that I'm telling here? What exactly is
Yeah,
happening? Particularly if you're letting the character drive it, right?
right. I've listened to, writers talk about, well, I'm a plotter, and then, so I have this outline and X has to happen in chapter 14. But by the time you get to chapter 14, the character has developed in a particular way that they wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
So you have to let your character surprise you, and you have to be, responsive.
yeah, most definitely. Okay, so we'll move on to the section that I like to call rapid fire, which basically means I'm gonna rapid fire ask the question, you take your time answering it.
Okay.
So this are the questions we ask all of our guests. First, what is on your desk when you're writing?
What is on my desk? I have well, I go back and forth from New Jersey and Florida, so I have a hard drive that I have to have with me, so that has to be attached to my computer. I have pictures of my kids, and I have a landline that doesn't work anymore, but it's still sitting there, and a couple of pens.
Nice. Is your phone like, is it like one of those nice, like heavy old school, heavy receiver phones,
No,
or
no, no, no. It's just I can actually show it to you right now. It's one of these, and I don't even know why we still have it, but
the
it's been
wireless
sitting there.
phone?
Yeah.
That's 1999 right there. I love that. Um, so what ritual, if any, do you have before or after you write?
Before I write, I like to read like a paragraph of a writer that I really, really like.
Oh,
Not usually crime fiction, but somebody who I think does language really well. Just it just gets me started.
yeah. I love that. That's such a great idea. And even if it's not related to your work, it's just that like getting your mindset and we are making story. It is story time now.
Yeah, and somebody who inspires me, who does sentences the way I always, want to do better sentences.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are writing multi POV or multiple timeline, do you write straight through like a reader reads, or do you write each section and weave them together?
I don't do multiple POV intentionally. I did a little
Hmm.
bit in night swimming, but it was just like, really peppered through from,
Yeah.
the perspective of the antagonist.
Hmm.
And that just, I didn't, I wrote it, I guess in a chronology.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. What is the most bullshit piece of advice you've heard?
Oh, I mean, write what you know just popped into my mind only because it's the piece you always hear.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's if it's the worst advice, but I've never worked for as a police officer, so
Yeah.
I mean I think write what you know, like you don't want to, like people write science fiction, they go to Mars.
Yeah.
So I
They
would say
definitely
have a
aren't
little
writing
piece of
that.
yourself in everything that grounds you, so that you can relate to it, but explore.
Yeah. I love that. And what is the best piece of advice you've heard?
Well, I already told you. Well, no, this is actually a David Bowie quote. He said that when you when you go out in the water and you go a little further so that your feet are no longer touching the bottom, and you're not, that's where you do things that are interesting. That's where you create. And it's really about going out of your comfort zone. And I
Yeah.
certainly did that writing crime fiction, and it was really rewarding to me. So, yeah, I would say that.
I love that. So it's like that right at that moment when you're no longer touching and you're trying to like,
Yeah, where you're not comfortable. You're not you like you can't just do the same old, same old.
yeah, that's fantastic. How many drafts do you do before you share with anybody?
Um, I like to get a clean draft, so I would say two or three, where I
Hmm.
have one or two beta readers who I, just really trust, and it's not like a really, it's not as polished, but it's certainly, where the first 50 pages are, in good shape, and I would say at
Yeah.
least two or three.
Okay, that makes sense. And what part of the process is your favorite? And what is your least favorite?
Um, My favorite is actually I like to edit, and I like where you have just like a sentence that sort of just is thrown in, and you can really just sort of really work it so that it's tying in a couple of different pieces of the novel. So you really just like I think editing you can do a lot with what you have, and see what's on the page is I guess ripe for more than you think.
Yeah. So it's kind of that line editing level where you're
Yeah,
really
where you
like
can,
trying
you're
to,
just
you're
taking a
making
sentence
it,
that looks
polishing
like
it
it's just sitting
beautifully.
there, and you can actually make it, drawing, different pieces of the novel so that it actually is working. Um, and I think, did you ask me what my least favorite
Yeah,
was?
least favorite part.
Oh, it's also editing because it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's definitely it's well, the first when you're drafting, you get to tell yourself the story, so that's kind of fun. But then it's the seeing like, oh God, what do I do with this? I think it's that second draft, or if you're like a skeleton draft person, that first draft, it's like, what is this story? What am
Right.
I actually
Yeah.
doing?
Can I ever get to the end here?
Yeah, yeah, it's a rough spot to be in. But what is your old school favorite mystery or thriller?
Oh, it was a Dorothy Hughes, and I think it's called In a Lonely Place. And
Okay.
I just think she did a great job with that. It's in the 1940s.
Okay. Fantastic. I've never heard of that, so I'll definitely have to check it out. Um, we love old school like mysteries and thrillers here because books are evergreen. They last forever.
And that's one, that stays fresh.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, Melanie. Where can people find you if they want to find out more about you or your books?
I have a website. I have not my podcast, my Substack, Cherchez la Femme, where I write essays about the 1970s, and that's really my big social media.
Fantastic. Well, if you would like to find me, you can reach me on Instagram at Sabrina Thatcher Author. Or if you'd like more information about my book coaching services, you can find that at crimeandquill.com. Until next time, friends, stay sharp and write twisted. Bye.
Thank you so much.